Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Kashmiris on both sides of the line of control and around the world are observing the Indian Republic Day as Black Day. In Azad Jammu and Kashmir, protest rallies and demonstrations are being held in all 10 districts. In a statement, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Kashmiris' constitutional rights are being denied by New Delhi. He said minorities including Muslims, Bengalis and Dalits are also being targeted in India. Meanwhile, the Indian farmers mark the country's Republic Day as a protest day against the government's controversial agricultural laws. Thousands of farmers entered the Red Fort in the capital city of New Delhi and hoisted flags of Khalistan. Police used batons and fired tear gas on the farmers' tractor rally. A blast has rocked Afghanistan's capital city of Kabul, killing a person and wounding another. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. This comes a day after an armored vehicle of the Italian embassy was hit by an IED blast in Kabul. The U.S. House of Representatives have delivered former President Donald Trump's impeachment article to the Senate. 9 House prosecutors carried the sole impeachment charge of incitement of insurrection across the Capitol. The historic Senate trial of the 74-year-old Trump will begin on the 8th of February. The number of deaths by COVID-19 in the United States has crossed 420,000 with over 25.2 million cases. Meanwhile, the new Brazilian variant of the virus has also been found in the United States. Mexico's COVID-19 death toll has topped 150,000 following a recent surge, while its infection tally has jumped to 1.7 million. Pakistan has registered over 1,800 new cases and 58 deaths overnight, raising the toll to 11,376, while the global number of infections is set to cross the 100 million mark, with more than 2.1 million fatalities. And in cricket, South Africa have lost their 6th wicket in the first Test match against Pakistan at the National Stadium in Karachi. Earlier, the Proteas won the toss and elected to bat first. The two sides will play a 2-match Test series and 3 T20 internationals. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Kashmiris on both sides of the line of control and around the world are observing the Indian Republic Day as Black Day.
To draw world attention to unlawful Indian occupation, protest rallies and demonstrations are being held in Azad Jammu and Kashmir. The demonstrations will highlight the tyrannical occupation and gross human rights violations by New Delhi's occupying forces. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says India is denying the constitutional rights of the Kashmiris, slamming the extremist RSS Hindutva ideology ruling India today. Qureshi said all minorities, including Muslims, Bengalis, Dalits, are being targeted. India illegally annexed occupied Kashmir on August 5, 2019 and imposed a crushing curfew in the valley ever since. The region has been turned into an open prison of over 13 million people, with livelihoods, education and healthcare paralyzed. Hundreds of unarmed innocent Kashmiri civilians have been martyred, while the curfew has created a serious humanitarian crisis as well. Meanwhile, the All Parties Hurriyat Conference is holding a rally outside the Indian High Commission in Islamabad to mark the day. The APHC leaders say the protest aims to apprise the world of the gross rights violations and custodial killings of the Muslims in the occupied Kashmir.
Meanwhile, the Indian farmers mark the country's Republic Day as a protest day against the government's controversial agricultural laws. Thousands of farmers entered the Red Fort in the capital city of New Delhi and hoisted flags of Khalistan.
Police used batons and fired tear gas on the protesting farmers as chaos prevailed at New Delhi's Singhu border. But farmers broke police barricades to force their way into the capital. Thousands of farmers are holding a tractor march to oppose the agricultural reforms. Indian police had told the farmers to hold their rally after the Republic Day parade, but the protesters did not agree. Heavy security has been deployed in view of the unprecedented protest. The unions have also announced a foot march to Parliament on February 1st, the day the annual budget is scheduled to be presented. A consortium of 41 farmer unions in India has been protesting for 2 months against laws they say expose them to corporate exploitation. Over 80 farmers have so far died from illnesses, while 4 have committed suicide during the sit-ins.
Now, for more on this, we are joined by Nikhil Verma, a political analyst from New Delhi. Nikhil Verma, thank you very much for your time. Now, Nikhil, despite scores of innocent lives already lost during the protest, the Indian government is using force against the farmers. Do you think this use of force down your morale?
Well, the situation in India is that the farmers have not accepted the 3 farm laws induced by the current government and are protesting. This is globally known. While we say the government is against farmers, yes, to an extent that they are not listening to the farmers. Today is the Republic Day of India, the 72nd, and we see that there are several thousand farmers already inside Delhi and protesting. They have gone ahead and breached various locations, various barricadings, and they're protesting against the farm laws, and this is how they want the government to take it back.
Right, Nikhil, do you think after this rally on the Indian Republic Day, the farmers will be able to get the controversial agricultural laws repealed?
Well, the rally is only a mark of protest. They shall continue to protest outside the borders of Delhi till the time these laws are not repealed. As of now, the government has made clear that they shall not repeal the laws. They have offered a suspension for 1.5 years in the meantime to discuss with the farmers. However, even after the intervention of the Supreme Court of India,
Right now, Nikhil Verma, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. Now, moving on, Pakistan has firmly opposed the creation of new permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council. However, Islamabad has supported increasing the non-permanent seats of the key UN body. Addressing the first meeting of the Inter-Governmental Negotiations Framework during the 75th session of the UN, Pakistan's envoy Munir Akram said the creation of new seats will make the Council less effective and more divided. He said the new seats will erode the principle of sovereign equality of states. But he said the proposal to have 21 non-permanent seats can redress the deficit of equitable representation. Akram also reiterated Islamabad's position for comprehensive reforms of the Council which meet the interests of all member states. Now, in Afghanistan, 1 person has been killed and another wounded in an improvised explosive device blast in the capital city of Kabul. In a statement, Kabul police said an investigation into the incident is underway, while no group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Meanwhile, a deputy head of the Kunduz Provincial Council and his driver were wounded in a blast in Kunduz city. The head of the Provincial Council said the incident happened as they left home for the office. Now, this comes the day after an armoured vehicle of the Italian embassy was hit by an IED blast in Kabul. Moving on now, a Taliban delegation has arrived in Iran to discuss Afghanistan's political and security situation. In a tweet, Taliban spokesperson Mohammad Naeem said the delegation is visiting on Iran's invitation. He said Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar is leading the delegate. Naeem added the Taliban will discuss Afghanistan's political and security situation and bilateral ties with Tehran. The spokesperson said discussion over the Afghan refugees in Iran will also be on the agenda. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson said the Afghan peace process will also be discussed. In a statement, Saeed Khatibzadeh said Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif will also hold a meeting with the visiting group. Now, China says it will conduct military exercises in the South China Sea this week. The announcement comes a day after Beijing condemned the entry of U.S. aircraft carrier group in the disputed waters. In a notification, China's Maritime Safety Administration prohibited entry into the Gulf of Tonkin from January 27 to 30th. A U.S. aircraft carrier group led by the USS Theodore Roosevelt entered the South China Sea on Saturday. The U.S. military said the move was aimed to promote freedom of the seas. But Beijing said such actions were not conducive to peace and stability in the region. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives have delivered former President Donald Trump's impeachment article to the Senate. Trump is charged with incitement of insurrection over Capitol Hill riots that left 5 people dead. Let's find out more in this report. The impeachment of Trump bars the fault lines in U.S. Congress as the brittle spirit of bipartisanship following Joe Biden's inauguration snaps. The Republican becomes the first president to face the trial twice and also the first to be impeached after leaving the office. 9 House prosecutors carried the sole impeachment article across the Capitol, making a solemn and ceremonial march to the Senate along the same halls the rioters ransacked just weeks ago. Lead House impeachment manager Jamie Raskin of Maryland read out the charge against Trump on the Senate floor.
In his conduct while President of the United States and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of the President of the United States and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States.
Commenting over the impeachment, President Biden has said the trial has to happen. The historic Senate trial of the 74-year-old Trump will begin on the 8th of February. Now, the number of deaths from COVID-19 in the United States has crossed 420,000 with over 25.2 million cases. Meanwhile, the new Brazilian variant of the virus has also been found in the United States. The global number of infections is set to cross the 100 million mark with more than 2.1 million fatalities. More about the pandemic in this report.
Controversies over the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, protests over the lockdown, and the transnational political woes over the vaccine distribution are the new trends in the fight against the pandemic. In the Americas, Mexico's COVID-19 death toll has topped 150,000 following a recent surge, while its infections tally has jumped to 1.7 million. Brazil's Supreme Court has approved an investigation into the government's handling of the COVID-19 in the Amazonian city of Manaus. Hospitals in Chile are struggling to cope as infections spike across the South American country. The worst-hit U.S. state of California lifted its stay-at-home orders, moving the counties back into their tier-based reopening framework. Meanwhile, United States President Joe Biden says he may raise his goal of 100 million vaccines in 100 days to 150 million doses.
I promised that we would get at least 100 million vaccinations. That's not people, because sometimes you need more than one shot, the vaccination, but 100 million shots in people's arms of the vaccine. I think with the grace of God and the goodwill of the neighbor and the creek not rising, as the old saying goes, I think we may be able to get that to 1.5 million a day rather than 1 million a day. But we have to meet that goal of 1 million a day.
In Europe, as infections spiked to record high in Spain, the capital, Madrid, has imposed a new curfew in the city. Police arrested at least 70 people in the Netherlands as anti-lockdown protests turned riots entered the third night. The European Union has threatened to impose tight controls on the export of vaccines made in the bloc, impacting the United Kingdom's supply of Pfizer jabs. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom says it is in close contact with suppliers after the EU issued the warning amid a row with the AstraZeneca over shortfall of the doses for member states. The World Health Organization says the report of $9.2 trillion loss to the global economy over vaccine nationalism will be a moral and economic failure.
The second study, commissioned by the International Chamber of Commerce Research Foundation, makes a strong economic case for vaccine equity. It finds that vaccine nationalism could cost the global economy up to $9.2 trillion, and almost half of that, $4.5 trillion, would be incurred in the wealthiest economies.
Over in Asia, India continues to struggle with one roadblock after another in its vaccine drive as technical glitches and operational failures mar the campaign. In China, 82 new cases have been detected in the mainland, with 69 locally transmitted infections.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, another 58 people have died from COVID-19 overnight, raising the toll to 11,376. The Health Ministry says 1,873 new infections were detected over the past 24 hours. The number of cases have risen to nearly 536,000, while over 490,000 have recovered. Currently, there are more than 34,000 active cases across the country. The ministry said over 242,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province. Punjab has reported more than 154,000 cases. In the capital, Islamabad, over 40,000 have been infected so far. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Russia has accused Western countries of encouraging rallies in support of jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. In a video conference, President Vladimir Putin said Saturday's mass protests were illegal.
Putin said everyone has the right to express their point of view within the framework provided by the law. The president added anything outside the law is not just counterproductive but dangerous. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden says Washington is concerned about Moscow's treatment of Navalny. Earlier, European Union foreign ministers met to discuss the response, with calls for increased curbs on Russia. The bloc said it will hold off from imposing sanctions on Moscow if Navalny and other detainees are released. The Kremlin critic called for protests after he was arrested on his return to Russia a week ago. On Saturday, police detained over 3,000 people and used force to break up rallies across Russia. Navalny's allies said they have planned a similar protest for Sunday.
Well, now the U.S. has approved all transactions involving Yemen's Houthi movement for the next month. The U.S. Treasury Department said foreign banks will not be exposed to sanctions if they conduct to or facilitate a transaction. Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo designated the Houthi as a terrorist organization a day before President Joe Biden took office. The measure banned Americans from doing business with the group and made it a crime to provide support or resources to. However, the Biden administration is currently reviewing the designation amid criticism from rights agencies. Yesterday, 22 aid organizations said in a joint statement that the designation will worsen Yemen's humanitarian crisis. Now, the second day of the fresh round of Syrian peace talks will start today in Geneva. This UN-led negotiations involve 15 members each of the Syrian government, opposition and civil society groups. UN envoy to Syria, Geir Pedersen, is facilitating the 5-day talks about the Constitutional Committee. The talks target to find a final and peaceful solution to the 10-year war in Syria. They aim to create a consensus on the basic principles of the Syrian constitution and will end on Friday. The government's Ahmed Khuzbari and opposition's Hadi al-Bahra are co-chairing the meeting. Now, the Central African Republic says its military has killed 44 rebel fighters. In a Facebook post, the government said the military and allied forces launched joint offensive in Boyali village. The statement read the militants were attempting to besiege Bangui and overturn the newly re-elected president. It said the killed militants also include several mercenaries from Chad, Sudan, as well as the members of the ethnic Fulani group. Meanwhile, a government spokesperson said the Bangui's forces have restarted the offensives against the rebels. He said the troops have recaptured a village from the rebels near the capital with the support from the Russian fighters. Earlier, the rebels tried to blockade Bangui a week before the recently held presidential election. Meanwhile, Greece has signed a $3 billion deal with France for the purchase of 18 Dassault-made Rafale fighter jets. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis said the recent military purchases are not a threat to any other country. After signing the deal, Greek Defence Minister said the latest addition will significantly strengthen the Air Force. He said the acquisition of the jet is a milestone in defence cooperation and relations between Greece and France. Meanwhile, French Defence Minister Florence Parly expressed hope that the Greek Navy will also acquire French ships. The first 6 new aircrafts are scheduled to arrive at Greece's Tanagra Air Force Base in July. Now, Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte is set to resign, hoping to form a new government with broader backing in the parliament. The resignation comes ahead of the vote on judicial reforms later this week that his coalition members warn he could lose. The Cabinet Office said Conte will hand in his resignation to the head of the state after informing the ministers of his decision. Conte survived a vote of confidence in the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate last week. The vote was called after former Prime Minister Matteo Renzi pulled his Italia Viva party out of the ruling coalition. Conte will need President Sergio Mattarellas' support and mandate to form a new government. Now, in Australia, thousands of people have gathered in Sydney to protest against the mistreatment of the Indigenous people. Police have arrested 1 person during the protest and 4 others after a skirmish with the security officials later. In a last-minute compromise with police, thousands were allowed to gather in socially distant groups in Sydney. Although the annual march was called off, January 26 marks the date the British fleet sailed into Sydney Harbour in 1788 to start a penal colony. But many Indigenous Australians who trace their lineage back 50,000 years call it Invasion Day.
This country was and always will be Aboriginal land. White Australia is, was and always will be a penal colony. Nothing changes it. And the blackfellas are the only people that can create change for the better.
Now, paleontologists in Argentina have unearthed the fossil-sized remains of a dinosaur. It could be the largest dinosaur to ever roam the planet some 98 million years ago.
First discovered in 2012, experts did not realize the significance of the fossils until they started piecing together the 24 vertebrae and pieces of fossilized bone found in thick mud in the Candelaris Formation in New Quan province. But in a new study, paleontologists say the remains belong to a huge plant-eating dinosaur called a titanosaur. They are potentially the largest ever unearthed. Titanosaurs were part of a highly successful group of dinosaurs called sauropods, known for their long necks, long tails, and pillar-like legs. The largest, such as Argentinosaurus and Patagotitan, were around 120 feet long. Paleontologists have said the skeleton of Titanosaur discovered in New Quan is far from complete.
Now, Paris Haute Couture Week, one of the high points of the fashion calendar, is being held without crowds this year. Brands have replaced the runway with online projections, with Christian Dior churning out some tarot magic. Let's find out more in this report. Lavish golden dresses decked out in zodiac signs and tarot symbols provided some Christian Dior-infused mysticism for the start of the Paris Couture Week. in a whimsical film set in a fairy-style castle with tarot card characters like the High Priestess or Justice. Dior designer Maria Grazia Chiuri provided glitter and gold with gowns that combined lame fabric with velvet. Tarot cards are a recurring motif and reference at Dior, including under the brand's superstitious late founder, with many looks evoking a 15th century illuminated tarot deck known as the Visconti Sforza.
The real thing is that can help not to be afraid about something that you don't know, about the future that is so uncertain, so insecure. I think that we are not too worried to change our life.
Luxury brands have had to transform the way they plan for collection with coronavirus restrictions, and Chiuri said Dior now carried out fittings with haute couture clients over Zoom calls, orchestrating adjustments from afar.
But after I realized that we have to try to make the best for all the supply chain that there is behind clothes, because we are not to forget that we have to maintain this tradition, our atelier, but also the embroidery in Paris that work for the couture.
Top brands like Chanel and Valentino are also due to present their haute couture ranges online. Now, European stocks have edged up over reports of certain vaccines being effective against the new variants of the coronavirus. Frankfurt's DAX is leading the gains by adding over 1%. The pan-European stock 600 has risen over 0.5%, with financial services adding more than 1%. London's FTSE 100, Italy's FTSE MIB and the CAC 40 in Paris have also ascended around 0.5%. Earlier, most Asian bourses declined except for Australia's ASX 200. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the world. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.